It was a crisp autumn night in Los Angeles, the kind where the city lights shimmered like a promise of something grand. Up in the hills of Beverly Hills, Ethan Blackwell sat in his sprawling mansion, a glass of bourbon in hand, staring out at the skyline he'd conquered. At 35, he was a tech titan, the kind of guy magazines called a visionary. His software startup had exploded into a multi-billion-dollar empire, and he wore his success like a tailored suit. Sharp, expensive, untouchable. The mansion around him screamed money, marble floors, modern art on the walls, a view that could make anyone feel like they owned the world. But Ethan didn't care about the view tonight. His mind was on control, power, the things that had gotten him here. Across the room, Sophia Bennett stood near the sleek fireplace, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of her sweater. She was 28, a graphic designer with a quiet kind of beauty, dark curls, warm hazel eyes, and a softness Ethan had once found charming. They had been married for 2 years, but lately she felt like a stranger in her own home. He'd grown distant, consumed by board meetings and late-night calls, leaving her to wonder if the man she'd fallen for still existed. Tonight, though, she had news. Big news. Her heart pounded as she rehearsed the words in her head, trying to find the courage to break through his icy wall. "Ethan," she said finally, her voice barely above the hum of the city outside. He didn't look up, just swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "I need to talk to you." "Make it quick," he muttered, his tone flat, like she was an intern pitching a bad idea. Sophia took a shaky breath, stepping closer. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air, fragile and heavy. For a split second, the room went still. Ethan set his glass down on the polished table, the clink echoing louder than it should have. He turned to her, his sharp blue eyes narrowing, but there was no warmth, no spark of joy, just a cold, calculating stare. Then, out of nowhere, a smirk curled his lips. "Pregnant," he repeated, his voice dripping with mockery, "and you're telling me it's mine?" Sophia's stomach dropped. "What? Ethan, of course it's yours. We're married. Why would you even—" "Don't," he cut her off, standing up so fast the chair scraped against the floor. He loomed over her, 6 feet of arrogance in a bespoke suit. "Don't act like I'm the fool here, Sophia. My dad always said women like you, pretty, sweet, playing the perfect wife, only stick around for the paycheck. And now this? A kid? You think I'm that naive?" Her eyes stung with tears, but she fought them back. "I don't want your money, Ethan. I never did. I thought you'd be happy. This is our baby." He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that made her flinch. "Happy? You think I'd buy that? This is a trap, plain and simple. A kid ties me down, gives you a claim to everything I've built. I'm not falling for it." Sophia shook her head, disbelief crashing over her like a wave. "You're wrong. I loved you for you, not your bank account. How can you say this?" Ethan stepped closer, his face inches from hers, his breath sharp with bourbon. "Love? Spare me the fairy tale. I've seen how this ends. You're not locking me into some sob story with a kid I didn't ask for." He reached into his desk drawer, pulled out a checkbook and scribbled furiously. Then he tore off the check and shoved it at her. "Here, 500 grand. Take it and get out. You'll be fine." She stared at the paper trembling in his hand, her voice breaking. "You think I'd sell my child for this? You think that's all we're worth to you?" His jaw tightened, his patience gone. "If you don't want the money, then leave with nothing. But you're not staying here. Pack your stuff and go, now." The finality in his voice hit her like a punch. Sophia looked at him, searching for a flicker of the man she'd married, the one who'd laughed with her over late-night sketches, who'd promised her forever. But that man was gone, if he'd ever been real. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she turned away, her hands instinctively cradling her stomach. She walked to their bedroom, the one they'd shared, and grabbed a small suitcase. Her hands shook as she stuffed in a few clothes, a photo of her parents, the little things that still felt like hers. This house, this life, it wasn't home anymore. When she came back, Ethan was by the front door, arms crossed, his face a mask of stone. "Don't come back," he said, his voice low and final. She met his gaze one last time, hoping for a crack, a hint of regret. There was nothing, just those cold blue eyes cutting her out of his world. Sophia stepped into the night, the LA air biting at her skin. The mansion's gates clanged shut behind her, a sound that echoed in her chest. She had no plan, no money beyond the few bucks in her wallet, and no one to call. Her family was back in Oregon, too far to reach tonight. She stood there, alone on the quiet street, the glow of the city mocking her pain. But as the tears fell, she whispered to the life growing inside her, "I'll figure it out, little one. I won't let him break us." Behind her, Ethan poured another drink, staring at the empty space she'd left. He told himself he'd done the right thing, that she'd been a liability, a distraction from the empire he was building. He dodged a bullet. But deep down, in a place he refused to acknowledge, a tiny splinter of doubt took root. He shook it off, downed the bourbon, and turned away. Sophia was gone, and that was that. Or so he thought. The bus rattled along the highway, the hum of the engine a steady backdrop to Sophia's racing thoughts. She'd left Los Angeles behind, the city's glitter fading in the rearview mirror as she headed north to Seattle. It wasn't a random choice. Her old college friend Mia Harper lived there, a lifeline from a past life. Sophia clutched her small suitcase, the only thing she'd taken from the mansion, and stared out the window at the endless stretch of road. Her eyes were red from crying, her body heavy with exhaustion, but her hand rested protectively on her stomach. She had no money, no plan, just a stubborn spark inside her that refused to let Ethan win. Seattle greeted her with gray skies and a damp chill that seeped into her bones. She stepped off the bus at the station, the air thick with the smell of rain and coffee. Her phone had died hours ago, and she didn't have Mia's current number, just an old address scribbled on a crumpled postcard from years back. With the last 20 bucks in her wallet, she took a cab to a modest apartment building in Capitol Hill. Standing outside Mia's door, she hesitated. What if Mia had moved? What if she didn't remember her? But she had no other options. She knocked, her heart thudding loud enough to drown out the city noise. The door swung open, and there stood Mia. Short red hair, freckles, a little older but still the same warm smile. "Sophia?" she gasped, her eyes widening. "Oh my God, is that you?" Sophia's voice cracked. "I didn't know where else to go." Before she could explain, Mia pulled her into a hug, tight and fierce, like she could squeeze the pain away. "Get in here," Mia said, dragging her inside. The apartment was small but cozy, books piled on every surface, a couch with a faded quilt, the smell of fresh coffee lingering. Mia sat her down, wrapped her in a blanket, and didn't ask questions until Sophia was ready. When she finally spoke, the story poured out. Ethan, the pregnancy, the check, the way he'd thrown her out like trash. Mia's face darkened with every word. "That asshole," she muttered when Sophia finished. "You deserve so much better than that jerk. You're staying here, okay? As long as you need." For the first time in days, Sophia felt a flicker of relief. She wasn't alone. Mia's place became her safe haven, a soft landing after the free fall. But she knew she couldn't lean on her friend forever. She had a baby coming, and that meant figuring things out fast. The next morning, Sophia hit the streets, her sneakers pounding the wet pavement as she hunted for work. She was 5 months pregnant, her belly just starting to show, but she hid it under loose sweaters. Seattle was expensive, and without a degree or savings, her options were slim. She filled out applications at every cafe, bookstore, and diner she passed, her handwriting shaky but determined. Most places turned her away. "No experience," they'd say, or "We're not hiring," but she kept going, refusing to let rejection break her. One rainy afternoon, she stumbled into a little coffee shop called Brew and Bean, tucked between a laundromat and a thrift store. The sign in the window read "Help Wanted," and desperation pushed her inside. The owner, a gruff woman named Carla with a smoker's rasp, looked her up and down. "You ever worked a register?" she asked, wiping down the counter. "No," Sophia admitted, "but I'm a quick learner. I just need a chance." Carla raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "It's grunt work, minimum wage, rude customers, long hours. You up for that?" "I'll do whatever it takes," Sophia said, her voice steady despite the nerves. Carla sighed, tossed her an apron, and muttered, "Start tomorrow. Don't screw up." It wasn't much, but it was something. Sophia walked back to Mia's that night, soaked from the rain but smiling for the first time in weeks. She had a job, a foothold. The next day she showed up early, tying the apron over her growing belly. The work was brutal, spilling coffee, memorizing orders, dodging snarky regulars who didn't tip. But she threw herself into it. Every dollar she earned felt like a brick in the foundation she was building for her baby. Months passed, and Sophia's belly grew rounder. She'd come home aching, her feet swollen, but Mia was always there with a mug of tea and a bad joke to lighten the mood. One night, after a double shift, Sophia sat on the couch, rubbing her stomach as the baby kicked. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" she whispered, tears prickling her eyes. It was the first time she'd felt her daughter move, and it hit her hard. She was doing this alone, but she wasn't helpless. Mia caught her crying and sat beside her. "You okay?" "Yeah," Sophia said, wiping her face. I want to give her more than this. More than scraping by." Mia nodded, thoughtful. "You're good with design. Why not try something bigger? I've seen free coding classes at the library. You could pick up some skills, maybe get a better gig." The idea stuck. The next day, Sophia started showing up at the library after work, her belly pressing against the table as she hunched over borrowed laptops. She taught herself HTML, then CSS, fumbling through tutorials late into the night. It was slow, frustrating, but she kept at it. When Lily was born, a tiny squalling bundle with Ethan's blue eyes and Sophia's dark curls, she didn't stop. She'd rock the baby with one hand, code with the other, fueled by coffee and sheer will. A year later, her persistence paid off. A small startup in Seattle hired her remotely to design their website. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. Better pay, flexible hours. She saved every penny, dreaming of a day when she and Lily wouldn't need Mia's couch. By the time Lily turned 3, Sophia had moved them into a tiny one-bedroom apartment near the water. It wasn't a mansion, but it was there. She'd sit on the floor with Lily, building block towers and telling her stories about a world full of possibilities. Back in LA, Ethan never crossed her mind anymore. He was a ghost, a memory she'd buried under years of hard work. She didn't need him. She never had. What she didn't know was that fate wasn't done with them yet. Lily was growing up fast, and one day she'd ask questions that would lead them both back to the man who'd thrown them away. But for now, Sophia was content. She'd survived. She'd built something real, and that was enough. Back in Los Angeles, the years spun by like pages in a book Ethan Blackwell barely bothered to read. He was 55 now, his hair streaked with silver, his jaw still sharp but softened by time. The tech empire he'd built, Blackwell Tech, had grown into a juggernaut, a name splashed across billboards and Forbes covers. His software ran half the city's startups, and his net worth had ballooned into the billions. The mansion in Beverly Hills was still his castle, upgraded with an infinity pool and a home theater he rarely used. On paper, Ethan had it all: money, power, a legacy that made people whisper his name with awe. But if you peeled back the gloss, the cracks were there, deep and jagged. He'd married twice since Sophia, The first was a model named Vanessa, all legs and ambition, who lasted 3 years before storming out with a hefty divorce settlement. The second was Claire, a venture capitalist with a smile like a shark. 2 years, another payout, same story. Both women had wanted the lifestyle, not the man, and Ethan didn't care enough to fight for them. Kids? None. He'd made sure of that. Too busy or too cynical to let anyone get that close. His nights were spent alone now, nursing a bourbon in that same leather chair, the LA skyline stretching out like a trophy he'd already won. Ethan didn't think about Sophia much anymore. She'd faded into the background of his life, a blurry footnote he'd convinced himself didn't matter. That night in 2003, when he'd shoved the check at her and slammed the door, he'd told himself he was smart, cutting loose a problem before it sank him. Love was a liability, a distraction from the game he played better than anyone. And he'd won, hadn't he? The billions in his bank account said yes. But sometimes, late at night when the bourbon hit hard, a shadow of her face would flicker in his mind. Those hazel eyes, hurt and defiant. He'd shake it off, pour another drink, and move on. His days were a blur of boardrooms and power plays. Blackwell Tech was at its peak, swallowing smaller companies, spitting out profits. Ethan thrived on the chaos, the deals, the way people bent over backwards to please him. He'd built a fortress around himself, impenetrable and cold. Friends? He didn't need them. Family? He'd never wanted one. His siblings? 2 older brothers. Lived their own lives back east, and he hadn't spoken to them in years. The only people in his orbit were employees, lawyers, and the occasional fling, who knew better than to stick around. But success came with a price tag he didn't like to admit. The divorces had left him bitter. The late nights had carved lines into his face, and the quiet of the mansion gnawed at him more than he'd ever say. He'd walk through those marble halls, the echo of his footsteps the only sound, and feel something. Not regret, not yet, but a hollowness he couldn't name. He filled it with work, with noise, with anything that kept him from looking too long in the mirror. One evening, sprawled on his couch with a tablet in hand, Ethan scrolled through a tech news site, skimming headlines about AI trends and stock jumps. A small article caught his eye, buried halfway down the page. Seattle's rising star, Sophia Bennett's codecraft takes on the big players. He paused, his thumb hovering over the screen. Sophia Bennett. The name rang a bell, faint but persistent, like a song he hadn't heard in decades. He clicked the link, more out of boredom than anything else. The article was short but glowing. Codecraft, a Seattle-based software firm, was making waves with its innovative tools for small businesses. Founded by Sophia Bennett, a self-taught coder who'd bootstrapped her way to success, the company was now valued at millions and eyeing expansion. There was a photo, grainy, professional, but unmistakable. Dark curls, those hazel eyes, a quiet confidence in her smile. It was her, his Sophia. Ethan's chest tightened, a jolt he hadn't expected. He set the tablet down, staring at the wall as his mind churned. It couldn't be a coincidence, could it? But no, Bennett was her maiden name, and the timeline fit. She'd landed on her feet, built something out of nothing. For a second, he felt a flicker of something. Pride, maybe, or unease? Then he snorted, shaking his head. Good for her, he muttered to himself, reaching for his drink. Doesn't change a thing. He didn't dig deeper. Didn't Google her. Didn't check if the kid she'd been carrying had made it into the world. That wasn't his life anymore. Sophia was a ghost from a past he'd buried, and he wasn't about to dig her up. Besides, he had bigger things to worry about. A merger on the horizon, a board meeting breathing down his neck. She was just a blip, a fleeting headline he'd forget by morning. But the seed was planted, whether he liked it or not. Somewhere deep down, in a corner of his mind he kept locked tight, a question started to form. What had he let go of that night? He didn't have an answer, didn't want one. Ethan Blackwell was untouchable, unstoppable, a man who'd built an empire on his own terms. Sophia and whatever life she'd made were irrelevant. That's what he told himself as he turned off the lights and headed to bed, the mansion silent around him. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the past wasn't done with him. 20 years had passed and the little girl Sophia had carried that night was all grown up. Her name was Lily, and she was coming for him, whether he was ready or not. 20 years had flown by, and in the fall of 2023, Lily Bennett was carving her own path. At 20, she was a junior at UCLA, majoring in computer science with a fire in her that reminded people of her mom. She had Sophia's dark curls and quick mind, but those piercing blue eyes, those were Ethan's, a mirror to the father she'd never known. Growing up in Seattle, Lily had been Sophia's shadow, watching her mom code late into the night, asking questions about algorithms over breakfast, soaking up every lesson about grit and grace. Sophia had never hidden the truth about Ethan. He was your dad, she'd say simply, but he chose a different life. We made ours without him. Lily didn't press for more. Her mom was enough, more than enough, more than enough. But lately, something had shifted. Maybe it was being in LA, so close to the world Ethan ruled, or maybe it was the way her professors tossed around Blackwell tech like it was the gold standard. Lily started digging. It began with a late-night Google search. Ethan Blackwell, tech mogul, billionaire, LA's untouchable king. Article after article painted him as a genius with a ruthless streak. A man who'd built an empire but left a trail of broken ties. Then she found a photo. Him at some gala, sharp suit, silver hair, those blue eyes staring back at her like a reflection. Her stomach twisted. This was the guy who'd kicked her mom out, left them to fend for themselves. And he was living like a god while they'd scraped by. She didn't tell Sophia. Her mom had moved on, built Codecraft into a powerhouse, and Lily didn't want to drag her back into the past. But for herself, she needed to see him. Not for a tearful reunion or some cheesy apology, just to look him in the eye and make him face what he'd thrown away. So one crisp October morning, she skipped class, pulled on her favorite denim jacket, and took the bus to downtown LA. Blackwell Tech's headquarters loomed ahead, a sleek tower of glass and steel, a monument to Ethan's ego. Inside, the lobby was all polished surfaces and hushed efficiency. Lily marched up to the reception desk, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "I need to see Ethan Blackwell," she said to the woman behind the counter, a blonde in her 30s with a tight smile. "Do you have an appointment?" the receptionist asked, barely looking up from her screen. "No," Lily admitted, "but it's important. Tell him it's personal." The woman's eyes flicked over her jeans, sneakers, no hint of the polished types who usually walk through those doors. "Mr. Blackwell doesn't take walk-ins. If you'd like to leave a message—" "I'm his daughter," Lily cut in, the words spilling out before she could stop them. It was the first time she'd said it out loud, and it felt like a punch. The receptionist froze, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She studied Lily for a long moment, then picked up the phone and murmured something too quiet to hear. "Wait here," she said, finally pointing to a row of leather chairs. Lily sat, her palms sweaty, her mind racing. What was she even doing? She hadn't planned this. She just acted, driven by a mix of anger and curiosity she couldn't shake. Minutes dragged by, each one heavier than the last, until a security guard appeared, a burly guy with a blank expression. "Follow me," he said. He led her through a maze of glass-walled offices, up an elevator that hummed too smoothly, and down a hallway lined with awards and framed magazine covers. Finally, they stopped at a massive door. The guard pushed it open, and there he was. Ethan Blackwell, sitting behind a desk that looked like it cost more than her mom's apartment. He was older than the photos, his face lined with years of stress. but those eyes were unmistakable. They locked onto hers, and for a split second, she saw a flash of something. Shock, maybe? Recognition? Before his mask slid back into place. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice cool and clipped, like he was sizing up a competitor. Lily stepped forward, refusing to flinch. "My name's Lily Bennett. I'm your daughter." Ethan didn't blink, but his fingers twitched on the desk. "I don't have a daughter," he said, the words flat, rehearsed. She let out a sharp laugh, bitter and loud in the quiet room. "Yeah, I figured you'd say that. But here's the thing. You don't get to rewrite history. 20 years ago, you kicked my mom out of your fancy house when she was pregnant with me, told her to take your money and disappear. She didn't. She raised me alone, worked her ass off so I could have a life, while you sat up here playing king." His jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. Lily took another step, her voice rising. "I don't want your money, your name, or your pity. I just wanted you to see me, to know I exist, that we survived without you. Mom built something amazing, and I'm here, standing on my own 2 feet, not because of you, but despite you." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he just stared at her, those blue eyes searching her face. Then he spoke, his voice low. "Sophia? She's your mother?" "Yeah," Lily snapped. "The woman you threw away. Ring a bell?" He exhaled, slow and deliberate, like he was piecing something together. "She never reached out." "Never told me?" "Why would she?" Lily shot back. "You made it crystal clear she wasn't worth your time. She had too much pride to beg, and we didn't need you dragging us down." She paused, her chest heaving, then shook her head. "You know what? I don't even know why I came here. You're not worth it." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Wait." It wasn't a command, more like a crack in his armor, a hint of something raw. Lily glanced back, wary. Ethan rubbed a hand over his face, looking tired, older than he had a minute ago. "You've got her fire," he said quietly, "and my eyes." Her stomach twisted. She didn't want his compliments, didn't want anything from him. "Keep your flattery," she said coldly. "You don't get to claim me now. You had your chance 20 years ago and you blew it." With that, she walked out, the door swinging shut behind her. Ethan didn't call her back. He sat there, alone in his glass tower, the silence pressing in. Lily's words echoed in his head. "We survived without you." And for the first time in years, he felt something sharp and unfamiliar. Not regret, not yet, but a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. He poured a drink, stared out at the city, and tried to shove it down. She was gone, just like Sophia. He'd move on. He always did. But Lily wasn't done. She stormed out of that building, her blood still boiling, and made a promise to herself. She'd never let him define her. What she didn't know, what Ethan didn't know, was that Sophia was watching from the sidelines, her own plan ticking away like a time bomb. The past was about to catch up, and it wouldn't be pretty. Lily's confrontation left a mark on Ethan he couldn't shake. He'd spent decades burying the past, locking it away behind steel doors of ambition and bourbon, but now it was clawing its way back. For days he replayed her words in his head, "We survived without you," and those blue eyes, his eyes, staring him down. He'd always prided himself on being untouchable, a man who didn't flinch, but Lily had gotten under his skin, and then there was Sophia. The article about codecraft kept popping into his mind, her name a ghost he couldn't outrun. He needed to see her, to know what she'd become, maybe even to prove he'd been right to let her go. Ethan didn't have to wait long. A big tech conference was rolling into LA Tech West, the kind of event where giants flexed their muscle and startups fought for scraps. Blackwell Tech was a headliner, naturally, but when he skimmed the speaker list, there it was, Sophia Bennett, CEO of Codecraft, keynote address. His pulse quickened. She was coming to his turf. He didn't know what he'd say, didn't even know why it mattered, but he had to be there. Something else nagged at him too, a dull ache in his chest he'd ignored for months. A doctor's visit last week had confirmed it. Heart disease, advanced, a ticking clock. He didn't have forever, and maybe that's why Lily's visit had hit so hard. The conference hall buzzed with energy. Suits, laptops, the hum of 1,000 conversations. Ethan sat near the front, his usual swagger dialed back, his hands restless in his lap. When Sophia took the stage, the room hushed. She wasn't the fragile woman he'd thrown out 20 years ago. At 48, she was striking. Dark curls pulled back, a tailored blazer hugging her frame, those hazel eyes sharp with purpose. She spoke about Codecraft's rise, her voice steady and warm, weaving a story of grit and innovation that had the crowd leaning in. Ethan couldn't look away. This was the woman he'd dismissed, the one he'd bet against, and she'd turned nothing into something massive. After her speech, the applause roared. Ethan waited as she mingled with attendees, then made his move. He caught her near the edge of the stage, her back to him, chatting with a reporter. "Sophia," he said, his voice rougher than he meant it to be. She turned, and for a split second, her face froze. Recognition. Then something colder. She excused herself from the reporter and faced him, arms crossed. "Ethan," she said, her tone flat, like she was naming a stranger. "What do you want?" He shifted, suddenly feeling smaller than he had in years. "I saw Lily," he started. "She came to my office, told me everything." Sophia's eyes narrowed, but she didn't flinch. "Good for her. She's got more guts than you ever did." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I messed up, Soph. Back then, I was young, stupid, scared. I thought I was protecting what I'd built, but I was wrong. I've regretted it every day since." She tilted her head, studying him like he was a puzzle she'd already solved. "Regret's a cheap word, Ethan. You don't get to throw it around now and expect it to mean something. You left us with nothing, less than nothing. I built a life for Lily without you, and we're better for it." "I know," he said, his voice cracking. "I don't deserve forgiveness, I'm not well. Heart's giving out. Doctors say I've got months, maybe less. I wanted to see you, to say I'm sorry before it's too late." Sophia's expression didn't soften. She stepped closer, her voice dropping low. "You think an apology fixes 20 years? You think I'd let you waltz back in because you're dying? Save it, Ethan. I didn't come here for you." He frowned, confused. "Then why are you here, in LA, at this conference?" A slow, icy smile spread across her face. And that's when the air shifted. "Oh, I've been planning this for a while," she said, her words deliberate, cutting. "You see, I didn't just build Codecraft to survive. I built it to take you down. For years, I've been buying up shares of Blackwell Tech, quietly, through proxies, piece by piece. I own 51% now. Your company? It's mine." Ethan's breath caught, his mind reeling. "What? That's impossible. I'd have known." "You were too busy playing king to notice," she cut in. "I've got the votes, the board, the legal backing. Tomorrow, I'm calling a meeting to take control. You're out, Ethan. You don't get to walk away from us and keep winning. Not anymore." He stared at her, the weight of it crashing down. This wasn't just revenge. It was a masterpiece, a slow burn she'd orchestrated over decades. The empire he'd spent his life building, the one he'd chosen over her and Lily, was slipping through his fingers. And she'd done it without him even seeing her coming. "Sophia," he rasped. "Why?" Her smile faded, replaced by a look of steel. "Because you owe us. Not money, not tears, consequences. You thought you could erase us, but I made sure you'd never forget. This isn't about forgiveness. It's about justice. She turned to walk away, but he grabbed her arm, desperate. Wait, Lily, does she know? Sophia pulled free, her gaze cold. She doesn't need to. She's stronger than either of us ever were, and she'll never have to clean up your messes. With that, she left him standing there, the crowd swallowing her up as she moved on, unshaken. Ethan stumbled back to his seat, his chest tight, not just from the disease, but from the realization that he'd lost everything, not just the company, but the game itself. He'd underestimated her, written her off as weak, and she'd turned it into a weapon. The conference blurred around him, voices and applause fading into static. He'd come here hoping for closure, maybe a shred of redemption, but Sophia had flipped the script. She wasn't the broken woman he'd left behind. She was the one holding the reins now. Back in Seattle, Lily was oblivious, cramming for midterms and texting her mom about the conference. Sophia hadn't told her about the shares, the takeover, any of it. She didn't need to. This was her victory, her way of settling the score. Not for Lily, but for the woman she'd been 20 years ago, shivering on that LA street with nothing but a suitcase and a promise to her unborn child. She'd kept that promise, and then some. Ethan, meanwhile, sat alone in his hotel suite that night, staring at the city he'd once owned. The ache in his chest wasn't just physical now. Sophia had taken his empire, but worse, she'd taken his illusions. He'd thought he was invincible, that his choices didn't matter. Now, with months left to live and his legacy in her hands, he knew the truth. He'd been the fool all along. The dust settled slowly after that night in LA. Sophia returned to Seattle, her steps lighter than they'd been in years. She didn't gloat about taking Blackwell Tech. It wasn't about bragging. It was about closing a chapter, putting a final period on a sentence that had dragged on too long. She sat in her office at Codecraft, a modest space overlooking the Puget Sound, and watched the water ripple under a gray sky. Lily was back at UCLA, acing her classes, texting her about some new coding project she was obsessed with. Sophia smiled at her phone. They'd built this life together, brick by brick, and it was enough. Ethan didn't fight the takeover. He couldn't, not with his health crumbling and the board already in Sophia's pocket. A few months later, he was gone. The news hit the headlines briefly. Tech titan Ethan Blackwell dies at 55, heart failure. His will left everything, his personal fortune, the mansion, the cars, to Lily, a last-ditch attempt at amends. But when the lawyer tracked her down, Lily shook her head. "I don't want it," she said, her voice firm. "I've got my own path. He doesn't get to buy his way into it now." The money went to charity instead, and Lily went back to her dorm, unbothered. Sophia heard about it from Mia over coffee one morning. "She's her mother's daughter," Mia said with a grin. Sophia laughed, a real laugh, the kind that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. She'd spent 20 years fighting not just Ethan, but the fear he'd planted in her that night. Now, standing on the other side, she felt free. Not because she'd won, but because she'd let go. She and Lily had their world, and it was stronger than anything Ethan could have torn down.